you said that what Trump was doing the past 3 weeks were just really the opening shots against this battle against the deep state. Can you maybe explain a little bit what you view as this battle against the deep state?
Yeah. Well, domestically, it's not this simple, but in large part, he's going after those people that sabotaged his first term. He understood at the end of that term um, that his own government had gone after him, and tried to bring him down. And it became even more obvious afterwards. There was the lawfare, and so when he came back, I think it needs to be pointed out actually how stupid it was of the establishment to do what they did. I think if they had actually treated him nicely, they could have really could have tamed him. No, I think he because he showed that tendency. He wanted to be friends with these people. That's sort of his tendency. If they had actually kind of worked with them and kind of worked with them, but then gradually pushed them in different directions and praised them, and they never launched these attacks on them like the Russiagate hoax or the impeachment proceedings or any of these things that we know so well. You could have they wouldn't have the monster in the White House that they have now. They helped to create that monster. And here he is. And they made these conflicts personal for him. Before he had some ideas, but he could have been talked out of them. But now, because you went after him the way you did in the first term, it's become personal. And for Trump, I think that's very important. That's a good explains not everything. You don't want to overstate this, but it explains a lot of what he does. He has, he likes certain people, he doesn't like other people, and he acts accordingly. I think that's very different from Putin, by the way. Putin's able to set that aside and just look at, rationally at national interest and proceed accordingly. I think that's probably true of Xi Jinping too, but that's not the person that Trump is. They've made it personal, and so a lot of what he's doing is cleaning house. Is just he understands, and I think correctly, that there are a lot of people, within the bureaucracy that he oversees as the chief executive, a lot of people who were out to get him, who are his enemies, and they truly are. So it's he's doing what he can to clean house. That's a big part of it. And then it extends overseas. He knows that, particularly in the UK, part of the Russia hoax was manufactured right there in the UK. There was the Steele dossier, and then the current prime minister, of course, actually sent some of his underlings to the U.S. to work on behalf of Kamala Harris, which was incredibly stupid. But again, they've made themselves enemies. So, yeah, that's part of it is personal, but he clearly has his ideas, and he's had them all his life, and part of it is this America first, which means that he just doesn't see the need to maintain a global empire. I think he kind of likes the idea of being, the most powerful man in the world. I think that's clear, and that's could be a dangerous side of his personality. But he doesn't. He's not a neocon. He doesn't. He doesn't really care if the Chinese are Chinese or the Russians are Russians, and they don't do things exactly the way they are. He feels no need to carry out this revolution in every country. And he knows, from it was clear that even those countries, those leaders in Europe who maybe didn't actively fight him like Keir Starmer did, but he knows that they don't like him. I mean, they made it clear in the months leading up to his election whose side they were on, and he remembers it. So. Again, I don't want to say that it was all personal, but I think in a good part it is.
So if he destroys the deep state, does that in effect destroy Western hegemony as well? Is that part of it, can we say?
Well, it's certainly part of it, yeah, because, I mean, that's...
USAID, right? USAID is an example.
Yeah, exactly. They're a regime change organization, and, these other NED, and so, most question about it. If he truly does dismantle them, And he's gone a long, ways down that. We'll see. Again, the establishment has ways of fighting back, and there are constitutional questions so far. But he's already done a lot of damage to those globalist institutions.
Yeah, how can they fight back? Because to me, it just feels like the deep state's on the run right now, and it's
Yeah,
great to see, that because if we're saying that this is also destroying Western hegemony, we know we can maybe have a peaceful world in the
yeah,
future if we can
right.
uproot all this. So how would they fight back?
Yeah. Well, the intelligence agencies can, have a way of manipulating the information landscape. Now, of course, I think they're finding that more and more difficult for the reasons that we're just describing. Before you can stage certain events, like the Russiagate hoax was that. It was something, these information, it was information that turned out often to be untrue, or, or had to, or spun in a certain way or whatever, but they would leak information and to build this hysteria against Trump. And I think that, by abusing that power, and it makes it harder for them to do that again. It just, occasionally you see efforts to link him to Trump. I mean, Trump to Putin, and you still see that. Of course, those attacks are made, but they just don't seem to have the impact that they used to have. And it's not pursued with the same kind of energy. And I think it's because, again, what we're saying about the fracturing of the larger information environment. So yeah, okay, it works within your establishment information bubble. Maybe it doesn't even work so well there, but at least you don't get any counter arguments there, and people consume your information, and maybe they don't believe it as much as they did, but they did. But now you have these larger kind of skeptical or alternative information communities, and they're not even hearing you, so it just doesn't work as well. So those kind of operations, it's not like they're going to stop, and they will still have some impact, but just not nearly as much. There's always a chance of false flags, but again, if you have the president and he's in charge and he has smart people around him, those false flags could be exposed. So it's tougher. Again, they're imaginative things that we haven't thought of that might be true. But one thing I do get the sense, both in Europe and America, is that like the establishment, again, they had that aura of invincibility for the longest time, because they've been there for such a long time. And even when Trump came in this first time, they essentially kind of contained him. And so you had this sense, well, nobody can really overthrow the establishment. But that, in a way, may have been their greatest strength. It's just that if there is this aura of invincibility, say, what's the point of attacking? I'll just be, if I go after the establishment, I'll just become the establishment's next victim. But when that aura of invincibility goes, then a lot of people say, hey, these people are not invincible. They can be defeated, and the opposition becomes energized.
Right. The pitchforks are out for the establishment.
Yeah, so it is a whole new world. We'll see. And then also, you think about, like, for example, what the Democrats put up against Trump. Now, Trump is a very flawed person, but what the Democrats had, they had somebody who was literally suffering from dementia, President Biden. And then Kamala Harris, who was just a real non-entity. That was the best they could do. You just sort of realize that they're fundamentally kind of empty and weak. And I think you see that through much of Europe too. These people are there's a reason that their own populations just don't have no love for them. And sometimes they vote for them out of habit, but they're really often very kind of empty people, pathetic, what they had going for them was they're part of this invincible establishment. But then when that again is that aura begins to fade, they're just revealed for what they are, and they're not really don't seem to be very formidable at all.
So it sounds like you're saying that the deep state really doesn't have a lot left, to be honest. They kind of fired most of their salvo, and now their munitions are low too here. The gig is up. So, should we pop the champagne and say that, okay,
it's not over. I think One of the things that I worry about is just with Trump that he may self-destruct in some ways. Again, I cheer on a lot of what he's doing, but then I think, for example, this trade war is really very, very dangerous and could be economically destructive, and it could come back to bite him in a big way. It could bring on a recession or spark, significant inflation, and his popularity could dry up pretty quickly. And even if the opposition is pathetic, they can take advantage of that. That's one example. And then, I'm very happy about these negotiations. It's wonderful that they're talking, and there are all kinds of things that can be done. But I still think it's unlikely. I hope it happens. I really do. But I think it's unlikely that they'll negotiate a settlement to this war. And what will happen when, finally you get to the point, Trump has been kind of boasting that he's going to get this done. And, he keeps on giving different time frames, but it's always in the not so distant future, that it becomes clear he can't, or he feels like he can't. I think it would be actually very wise for him to accept Putin's terms and end the war, on Putin's terms. But it's going to be hard for him to do that, maybe personally or just because of opposition among his advisors or whatever. And then, well, the Ukrainians have outright said that if they're not part of it, they're not going to abide by the agreement. So, this whole thing, it's still very doubtful, still very much up in the air. And if it falls apart, I think, the Russians will just keep on marching west, and they can march faster and faster. And then we can have a whole new crisis, and maybe, potentially like a complete reversal on the part of Trump if they start heading towards Odessa and Kiev or something. He doesn't want to be seen as weak. That's part of him. He made a lot of hay out of Biden's Afghanistan failure, and he doesn't want to have the same thing pinned on him. So there are a lot of things that could go wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's great, what's happened so far. And so there's reasons to be hopeful where there were no reasons before. But we're a long ways from the finish line.
If he wants to get this agreement, it sounds like you think the biggest threat to torpedoing this negotiation is just going to be the pressure coming from the West. And I try to spend 15, 20 minutes watching BBC and CNN, and I could see the narrative that they're pushing, that how, Ukraine and Europe must be at the table, and they never acknowledge any of the reasons why Russia started this SMO to begin with. But if Trump and Vance start explaining the rationale behind the Russians, I think then everything changes very quickly. So do you think that's possibly what will happen? Yeah. That they'll just be able to say, like, look, these were the agreements with Minsk 1, Minsk 2. Here's the Istanbul agreement that was torn up. This is, everything. We're for human rights and the suppression of the Russian language, banning the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Zelensky is no longer actually the legal president of Ukraine because his term expired of May last year. There is no democracy, suppressing opposition parties, not allowing alternative, opposition media, anything like this. There's an endless amount of ammunition to destroy the Ukrainian regime and this idea that we are supporting democracy. So it seems to me very easy to actually, to just, like I said, the narrative it's all fake. You can you can tear the whole thing down so easily. Right. And if they just go that route, then I think it's over. Then once people, because the reality is, we are in our information continent, like you said, and we understand what's going on. Our listeners understand what's going on. But 95% of the world, or of the Western world, or 90%, I don't know, haven't even heard these things. They don't even know. They just hear over and over again, unprovoked, invasion, completely unprovoked invasion into Ukraine, and Putin's assassinated Navalny in his prison, and all these things, just nonstop, Right. And I just feel like if the Trump team takes that route, then it's game over. Do you think so?
I think you're right. Again, we've argued earlier that the narrative is just such a big part of the whole picture that it can't be ignored. You can't just go ahead and negotiate agreement and leave the false narrative intact. And I think, again, that was one of the mistakes that the Obama administration made when they negotiated the JCPOA with Iran. They still, Iran was evil, but we made this, and they're a bunch of madmen who want to destroy the world, or a good part of it. They didn't fight it. So it was easy for opponents of the agreement to tear it up, and Trump himself did that. So it's the same thing here. Okay, they're going to negotiate, but yeah, I agree. They need to go after the narrative as part of their negotiation strategy. And I believe they can do it because they really do have the facts on their side. And we've seen some of it, some things that Trump has said, and Vance didn't really shine a light on Ukraine or Russia, but he shined a light on Europe, that he exposed their hypocrisy, and that was part of it. That's part of what they need to do. So yeah, I think they need to go after that in a big way, and there will be a lot of howls of protests, but they just need to stick to their guns. And again, it would be much better for the U.S. and for Ukraine if we got this deal, if he accepted Putin's terms, and he just stops with the 4-0 plus Crimea. And, the Ukrainians are now saying, the Europeans are now saying, we're not going to, if we're not at the table, we can't support it. But in the end, without the U.S., the truth is they really don't have a chance. So they just, I think he just called their bluff. And so it could be done. It could be done, but you have to, I don't think you can take half measures. Like you say, you just go say, hey, look, let's be honest, these are a bunch of crooks. They're not even democratic, this whole thing. And this is something that Trump should like to do, pin it on Biden, and rightly so. Just say this was a really stupid venture by Biden. The whole thing was false. He lied to you. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. And of course, there will be a lot of people in the U.S. that are going to be very angry about it. But I think the majority who say, yeah, what are we sending our money over there for? This doesn't have anything to do with us. So he could do it.
Right. There's so much howling about that. Of course, Ukraine needs to be part of these peace talks, this negotiation. And the fact that they're not there and is causing a lot of distress amongst the West. And I can understand for the uninformed viewer, or not even necessarily so uninformed, but just if you're looking at it superficially, it's like, well, that's crazy. How can Ukraine not be there? They're the one. This is their war, right? They're fighting this. So how would you attack that narrative, that statement? Like, why shouldn't Ukraine not be there? Shouldn't they be there? What would you say?
Well, I would say that first of all, they are completely dependent on us. And so, I mean, when you just kind of give up, you make yourself completely dependent on another power. The truth is, you have to give up a lot of your own sovereignty, and they've done that. You just can't pretend like, oh, it's up to them. It's not up to them, because we're actually empowering them to do this. And if we walk away, they can't. So it really isn't their choice. And then also you point out that their president was not democratically elected. This regime that's in power is an authoritarian regime that has suppressed even if you do have the elections, it's not going to be fair, because all kinds of political parties have been banned in the country, and then all kinds of media outlets have been banned. Many of them have been. Just all the leftist parties, all the Eastern Ukrainian parties, they've all been banned. And any party that just completely didn't toe the line, even pro-Maidan, pro-Western kind of media organizations and parties have been banned because they're just not faithful enough to Zelensky and his gang. You say, these people don't really represent Ukraine. So they don't have a right to be at the table.
Right. I think that's what the Trump administration needs to do. Mm-hmm. When they're being accused constantly of like, how can you not bring Ukraine to the table? They need to say that, well, Zelensky has no legal standing as the president. He is not democratically elected. There have been no elections, and point out, like you said, the arresting of opposition parties, the suppression of all opposition media, that does not represent Ukraine. Zelensky is not speaking on behalf of Ukrainians. That needs to come out. And I don't know. Do you think why don't they do that? I mean, that seems
Well,
like the
yeah,
clear answer
right,
to
right,
when they say like, why can't we? Zelensky needs to be in the the conversation. We need to have Ukraine. And
yeah,
then when they're asked that question, it seems like I heard Kellogg. I'm not sure. I heard somebody else, but maybe it was Rubio. They're just like, well, of course, Ukraine is going to be
yeah,
involved in some way, but they don't really explain
yeah,
how or why. Instead of
right,
just saying like, no, look, we need to have a
right,
free and fair election. We're about democracy. We need to have a free and fair election in Ukraine, right? This is not the legal. Even if you did reach a negotiation, you could argue that the negotiation with Ukraine isn't valid because you don't have a legal president
mhm,
that has a mandate to make this decision.
right,
This is
right,
a dictator that does not have any
right,
legal right to be president.
yeah. No, I think you're completely right. Yeah, I think a problem with a lot of politicians or anybody who's making an argument is quite often to win friends to your side. You often concede a lot of points. It's like, of course, like, yeah, I think like you. It's just that we need to do this, and the danger of that is you can concede too much, and I think that's what they're doing. It's just like it, you don't want to. There's a fear of appearing too radical. So sometimes, okay, you've actually gone through and made some breakthroughs and stated some unwelcome truths, but you feel like to prevent the opposition from characterizing you as some wild-eyed radical or Putin puppet, you end up making all these other concessions. I think we're talking about that earlier, like in the case of Tucker Carlson or whatever. I mean, he has gone a long ways, much to his credit, but he still feel like the need to okay, at least maintain the conversation. I got to pretend that I do believe in some of these, but I think that's a mistake because again, you are the president. You are the administration. You can reset this narrative. You can tear down the old one and create a new one. Now there will be a lot of opposition initially, but I think a lot of people were misinformed, and when they find out that they're misinformed, they'll be with you. And other people just kind of go whichever the wind blows, and if they see the wind's blowing this way, they'll start repeating uh, your talking points. So I think they should do it. I think they should that's really their only chance. They need to throw caution to the winds and take advantage of this moment and actually just tear down that whole narrative.
Guys, thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please check out my website, noblisky.io. You can look at the pinned comment below. It's something that I think you'll find useful. Even my dad uses it. My wife uses it. Instead of Googling things, you should be using this website because you get access to OpenAI, Perplexity, Anthropic, DeepSeek. There's hundreds of models that you can use. It's what I use to create the thumbnail images, things like this. And the greatest thing about it is there's no rate limits. There are no subscription fees. It's free to try out and use. You get free tokens every day. So if you're not a heavy AI user, you will never have to pay for anything. But this is really my passion project. I really want to get it off the ground, and I think you guys would like it. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you have time to download the apps and give it 5 stars, that'd mean a lot to me as well. Thanks a lot.